I was organizing my late husband's papers in his study when my phone rang, interrupting the afternoon silence. "Mom, you have 24 hours to pack your things and leave. The house is mine now, along with the $300 million Dad left me. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." And she hung up without waiting for my response. 27 years I had devoted to raising that girl, nurturing her through every challenge. In 30 seconds, she erased everything. I set the phone down slowly, my hands surprisingly steady. The lawyer called an hour later, mentioning some additional paperwork that required my signature, something about final estate details. I took a deep breath and straightened my shoulders. Then I remembered something my husband had whispered to me in confidence just weeks before he passed away. But there was something Rebecca didn't know about that inheritance, something that would change everything. "My name is Elisa, and this is how my daughter discovered that greed has consequences she never imagined." That whispered confidence my husband shared with me just weeks before his death suddenly became crystal clear as I sat in Dr. Ricardo's law office 3 days later. The mahogany desk between us held the same leather portfolio that had contained Vitorino's will during the reading, but now Dr. Ricardo was pulling out additional documents I had never seen before. His hands trembled slightly as he arranged the papers, and I could see the conflict written across his weathered face. "Mrs. Azevedo, there are aspects of your husband's will that I was instructed not to reveal unless specific circumstances arose." He paused, glancing toward the closed door of his office. "Those circumstances have now occurred. The secret clause Vitorino had inserted was breathtaking in its foresight. If Rebecca demonstrated cruelty, greed, or callous disregard for family bonds during the mourning period, the entire inheritance would revert to me within 12 months. But there was more. Vitorino had anticipated exactly how our daughter would behave and had crafted an elaborate test that would either redeem her character or expose her true nature. "Your husband recorded a video message for you," Dr. Ricardo said, sliding an envelope across the desk. "He wanted you to hear his reasoning directly." That evening in my modest hotel room, I watched my deceased husband's face fill the laptop screen Dr. Ricardo had provided. Vitorino looked tired but determined, his silver hair combed back the way I had always loved. "My dearest Elisa," his recorded voice began, "if you are watching this, it means our daughter has chosen cruelty over compassion. I have spent months observing small signs that worried me deeply. The way she spoke to our housekeeper, Maria, when she thought we weren't listening, her impatience with elderly guests at charity events, the dismissive comments about people who don't work hard enough to succeed. I saw our love and values failing to take root in her heart, and I realized that inheriting wealth without earning wisdom would destroy the person I desperately want her to become." My husband's plan was methodical and heartbreaking. I was to maintain the appearance of financial ruin, staying in this simple hotel room and wearing my oldest clothes when encountering Rebecca. Dr. Ricardo would document every interaction, every cruel word, every demonstration of our daughter's character. "She must believe she has won completely," Vitorino explained in the video. "Only when she feels secure in her cruelty will she reveal her true self. And only then can we know if redemption is possible or if stronger measures are necessary." The video continued for nearly an hour, detailing specific scenarios he expected and precise responses I should give to trigger revealing moments. The memories that sustained me during those initial painful weeks were vivid and numerous. I remembered the morning when 5-year-old Rebecca had fallen from her bicycle and scraped both knees on the gravel driveway of our first home. Instead of crying, she had looked up at me with determined eyes and said, "Mama, I want to try again, but can you run beside me this time?" I had spent the entire afternoon jogging alongside her pink bicycle, my hand barely touching the seat, while she wobbled and straightened and finally found her balance. That evening, she had insisted on calling her father at work to tell him about her accomplishment. her voice bubbling with pride and joy. Another memory struck me with equal force as I sat in that sterile hotel room. Rebecca was 12 years old, and we were volunteering together at the Children's Hospital downtown. A little boy named Tommy, maybe 6 years old, was receiving chemotherapy and had lost all his hair. Rebecca had disappeared for 20 minutes, and when she returned, she was carrying a small stuffed elephant she had purchased in the gift shop with her own allowance money. Tommy said elephants are his favorite, she explained, kneeling beside his bed. And elephants never forget, so now he'll never forget that people care about him. The boy's mother had cried quietly, and even the nurses had stopped their busy routines to witness the moment. That was the daughter I thought I knew. The painful number that haunted my sleepless nights was 27. 27 years of motherhood, of bedtime stories and scraped knee bandages, of high school graduation tears and college send-off hugs. 27 years of teaching kindness by example, of family vacations where we volunteered at local charities, of dinner table conversations about gratitude and responsibility, all of it seemingly erased in the space of a 30-second phone call. But Vitorino's video had planted a different perspective. Those 27 years are not lost, his recorded voice had assured me. They are dormant, waiting for the right catalyst to reawaken them. This test will either revive the daughter we raised or prove that she needs more dramatic intervention to find her way back to herself. Dr. Ricardo visited me weekly with updates that grew increasingly disturbing. Within 4 days of claiming her inheritance, Rebecca had fired Maria, our housekeeper of 15 years, without severance or explanation. Maria had worked through my husband's illness, staying late countless nights to prepare special meals that might tempt his failing appetite. She had been more family than employee, and Rebecca dismissed her with the coldness of discarding an old appliance. She said the house didn't need such expensive help anymore, Dr. Ricardo reported, his voice tight with disapproval. Maria left in tears. The pattern that emerged over the following weeks was systematic and chilling. Rebecca canceled the annual charity gala that had raised over $2 million for children's cancer research, the same cause she had supported as a 12-year-old girl with a stuffed elephant. She terminated the family's scholarship fund that had put 37 underprivileged students through college over the past decade. She fired the gardener who had maintained our rose garden, the one where she had played tea party as a little girl, claiming the landscaping expenses were wasteful and unnecessary. Most devastating was her treatment of Celestino, Vitorino's former business partner who had fallen on hard times after his own wife's medical expenses. For years, we had quietly helped Celestino with a monthly allowance that preserved his dignity while ensuring his survival. Rebecca cut off this support with a letter so cruel that Celestino brought it to Dr. Ricardo in distress. She wrote that weak people who can't manage their own finances deserve their poverty, the lawyer told me, his voice shaking with anger. She said her father's charity had been enabling failure and that she would not continue throwing money away on losers. But the most painful revelation came when Dr. Ricardo showed me the recordings from the security cameras at our family home. Rebecca had invited friends over for what she called a liberation party just 1 week after the funeral. The footage showed her laughing as she threw away photo albums, including pictures of family vacations and my wedding portraits. She told her friends that she was finally free from pretending to care about boring charity work, and that she planned to live the life she deserved without the burden of her parents' outdated values. The diagnosis of what I was witnessing became clear through conversations with Dr. Ricardo and my own painful reflection. This was not normal grief or temporary selfishness. This was the emergence of a worldview that had been hidden beneath years of social expectations and parental oversight. Rebecca had learned to perform kindness when observed, but had never internalized its value. The wealth had not corrupted her. It had simply removed the external pressures that had forced her to disguise her true priorities. What we're seeing is learned entitlement without earned wisdom, Dr. Ricardo explained during one of our weekly meetings. She has always had access to money, but never had to sacrifice for others or face real consequences for cruelty. Your husband suspected this might happen because he noticed how easily she abandoned relationships when they became inconvenient. Remember how she stopped visiting her college roommate after the girl's family lost their business? Or how she changed friend groups whenever someone needed emotional support during difficult times? The pattern had been there all along, hidden beneath the surface of a privileged life. Rebecca had never learned empathy through hardship because she had never experienced hardship. She had never developed resilience through failure because success had always been provided for her. Most critically, she had never understood the weight of responsibility because consequences had always been managed by others. The inheritance had not changed her character. It had simply revealed character that had never been tested. This realization brought both clarity and devastating sadness. I was not mourning the loss of a good daughter who had suddenly become cruel. I was mourning the recognition that the daughter I thought I knew had been a carefully maintained performance. The real Rebecca was the person I was seeing now, stripped of all pretense and external pressure. But Vitorino's plan suggested he believed this true self could still be reached and transformed, which meant I had to continue playing my role in his elaborate test. The turning point came during my 5th week at the hotel, when Dr. Ricardo arrived with a folder thick with documentation. Mrs. Azevedo, I believe we have sufficient evidence to trigger the inheritance clause, but your husband's instructions were very specific about timing. He sat across from my small table, spreading out photographs, bank records, and witness statements. We must wait for what he called the natural consequences to occur. Rebecca's behavior will eventually create its own crisis, and only then will she be receptive to learning the lessons this experience is designed to teach. The crisis came in the form of a phone call from Dr. Ricardo at 6 a.m, exactly 8 weeks after Rebecca had thrown me out. His voice was urgent but controlled as he explained that Rebecca had fallen victim to an elaborate financial scam. She lost $50 million to fraudsters who convinced her they were investment advisors, he said. The scammers used fake credentials and sophisticated presentations to gain her trust, then disappeared with funds she had transferred to offshore accounts. The details of the scam were almost embarrassingly simple, which made the loss even more devastating. The fraudsters had approached Rebecca at an upscale restaurant, claiming to represent an exclusive investment firm that only worked with ultra-high net worth individuals. They had flattered her intelligence and business acumen, suggesting that her parents had been too conservative with their money and that she was smart enough to generate much higher returns. The fake advisors had shown her fabricated portfolios of other wealthy clients who had supposedly doubled their money within months. Rebecca had been so eager to prove her financial sophistication that she had ignored basic due diligence. She had not verified the firm's credentials, not consulted with Dr. Ricardo or any other financial advisor, and not researched the investment strategies being proposed. Instead, she had transferred $50 million to accounts that disappeared within 72 hours. The scammers had vanished completely, leaving behind fake business cards and a trail of false identities that would take years for investigators to unravel. When Dr. Ricardo finished explaining the situation, I felt no satisfaction or vindication. Instead, I felt the complex mixture of heartbreak and hope that Vitorino had predicted in his video message. This is the moment he was waiting for, I realized out loud. She has to lose everything she thought made her superior before she can learn who she really wants to be. Dr. Ricardo nodded gravely. Your husband wrote specific instructions for this scenario. He believed that financial loss would force her to confront the emptiness of the values she had embraced. The phone call from Rebecca came 12 hours later, and her voice was barely recognizable. Gone was the cold arrogance that had characterized our last conversation. Instead, I heard the trembling voice of a frightened young woman who had suddenly realized she was completely alone. "Mom," she whispered, and the word carried weight it had never held before. "I made a terrible mistake. I lost everything. I don't know what to do." She paused, and I could hear her crying softly. "I know I don't deserve your help after how I treated you, but I don't have anyone else to call." That conversation lasted 3 hours, and by the end, I could see the person Vitorino had believed was still buried somewhere inside our daughter. Rebecca admitted that she had felt empty and angry for months, even before her father's death. She confessed that the wealth had made her feel powerful but not happy, and that she had driven away everyone who genuinely cared about her. "I fired Maria because seeing her reminded me of how cruel I had become," she said through tears. "She looked at me like she didn't recognize me, and I realized I didn't recognize myself either." The procedural plan that Vitorino had outlined required 4 specific steps, each designed to test Rebecca's willingness to change and her capacity for genuine growth. Dr. Ricardo met with us together for the first time since the inheritance reading, and his demeanor had shifted from professional distance to cautious optimism. "Your father anticipated this exact scenario," he told Rebecca gently. "Everything that has happened, including the financial loss, was within the range of possibilities he planned for." The first step was legal acknowledgement of her mistakes. Rebecca had to formally apologize to everyone she had wronged, not through phone calls or letters, but through face-to-face meetings where she would listen to the impact of her actions. "This is not about your comfort or convenience," Dr. Ricardo explained. "This is about understanding the real consequences of cruelty and taking responsibility for the pain you have caused." Rebecca agreed immediately, though I could see the fear in her eyes as she contemplated facing Maria, Celestino, and the others she had dismissed so callously. The second step was financial discipline. Despite losing $50 million, Rebecca still had access to significant funds, but now she would live on a strict budget while learning to earn money through actual work. "Your father believed that understanding the value of labor was essential for understanding the value of wealth," Dr. Ricardo continued. "You will find employment at an hourly wage and live within those means while you prove your character has changed." This requirement clearly frightened Rebecca more than the apologies, as she had never worked a job in her life. The third step was logistical service to others. Rebecca would volunteer at the same children's hospital where she had once given a stuffed elephant to a little boy named Tommy. She would work in the gift shop, help with patient transport, and assist families navigating the complex medical system. "This will reconnect you with the empathy your father saw in you as a child," Dr. Ricardo explained. "And it will remind you daily that wealth is meaningless if it is not used to reduce suffering in the world." The fourth step was social accountability. Rebecca would attend monthly meetings with a group of people who had overcome serious character flaws in their own lives. These were not therapy sessions, but structured conversations where she would share her progress and setbacks with others who understood the difficulty of genuine change. "Your father researched this group extensively," Dr. Ricardo said. "They are people who have learned to transform selfishness into service, and they will hold you accountable in ways that friends and family cannot." Each step included specific benchmarks and timelines. The apologies had to be completed within 60 days. The employment had to be maintained for at least 1 year. The volunteer work required a minimum of 10 hours per week for 18 months. The accountability group meetings were mandatory for 2 years. Only when all 4 steps are completed to the satisfaction of an independent review board will you regain access to your full inheritance, Dr. Ricardo concluded. And that board includes your mother as the primary decision maker. As we discussed these requirements, I watched Rebecca's face carefully for signs of resentment or manipulation. Instead, I saw something I had not seen in years: genuine humility. She did not negotiate the terms or seek loopholes. She did not complain about the difficulty or duration of the requirements. She simply nodded and asked practical questions about how to begin. "I want to start with Maria," she said quietly. "I need to apologize to her first, because firing her was the cruelest thing I did, and she deserves to hear that I understand how wrong I was." But even as we outlined this careful plan, I could sense that Rebecca was still testing boundaries and looking for ways to minimize her discomfort. The counterattack came in subtle forms over the following weeks as she began to realize how dramatically her life would change. Her first attempt was emotional manipulation, disguised as vulnerability. She called me daily with dramatic updates about how difficult it was to find work and how embarrassed she felt about her situation. "Maybe I could start with a part-time position," she suggested during one call, "just until I get used to working. And maybe the volunteer hours could be reduced if I'm also working full-time." When I refused to negotiate the terms, her approach shifted to logistical complaints. She argued that living on minimum wage was unrealistic, given her previous lifestyle, and that she needed time to adjust her expenses before committing to such strict limits. She suggested that she could demonstrate her character change through financial donations rather than volunteer work, claiming this would be more efficient and impactful. Each suggestion was presented reasonably, but I recognized the underlying attempt to avoid the uncomfortable aspects of her father's plan. The most serious counterattack came when Rebecca discovered that Dr. Ricardo was documenting her compliance with each requirement and reporting her progress to me weekly. She accused us of treating her like a child and demanded to speak with other lawyers about the legality of the inheritance conditions. "This feels like blackmail," she said during a tense phone conversation. "Dad can't control my life from the grave, and I don't think these requirements would hold up in court." Her tone had shifted back toward the entitlement I remembered from our last conversation before the financial crisis. I responded to each challenge with calm documentation rather than emotional argument. When she complained about the difficulty of finding work, I reminded her that millions of people managed to build careers without family wealth. When she suggested modifications to the volunteer requirements, I asked her to explain how reducing service to others would demonstrate character growth. When she threatened legal action, I simply said that she was free to consult any lawyer she chose, but that the inheritance conditions were legally binding and had been crafted by experts in estate law. The most revealing moment came when Rebecca tried to enlist allies in pressuring me to reduce the requirements. She contacted several family friends, painting herself as a victim of unreasonable demands and suggesting that I was being vindictive rather than helpful. One of these friends, Janet Morrison, called me directly to advocate for Rebecca. "Elisa, don't you think you're being a bit harsh?" Janet asked during an uncomfortable conversation. "The poor girl has already lost so much money and learned her lesson. Why make her suffer more by forcing her to work minimum wage jobs?" This intervention gave me the opportunity to explain the difference between punishment and education. "Janet, if Rebecca had accidentally lost that money through inexperience, I would agree with you," I replied. "But she lost it because she believed she was too smart to need advice and too superior to follow normal precautions." The work requirement is not about suffering. It is about learning skills she has never developed. The volunteer work is not about punishment. It is about reconnecting with the empathy she demonstrated as a child. When Janet continued to argue that the requirements were excessive, I shared some of the documented evidence of Rebecca's cruelty during the weeks following her father's death. The recordings of her mocking our family's charitable work, the photographs of discarded family mementos, and the cruel letter to Celestino painted a picture that even sympathetic friends found difficult to defend. "Your husband was wise to anticipate this behavior," Janet admitted by the end of our conversation. "I had no idea how completely she had changed." The formal measure that shifted the power dynamic permanently came through a legal document Dr. Ricardo presented during our third month of this process. Vitorino had established a trust structure that automatically transferred assets based on documented behavioral changes rather than simple time requirements. This meant that Rebecca's progress was being evaluated continuously by independent observers, and her access to funds would increase or decrease based on demonstrated character growth rather than promised good intentions. The trust included provisions I had not previously understood. If Rebecca successfully completed all requirements and maintained her character changes for 2 full years, she would regain control of her inheritance, plus additional funds that had been growing in carefully managed investments. However, if she failed any requirement or reverted to previous patterns of behavior, the money would be permanently redirected to establish a charitable foundation bearing her father's name. This structure eliminated the possibility of temporary compliance, followed by a return to old behaviors. More importantly, the trust gave me legal authority to evaluate Rebecca's sincerity and progress. I was not simply waiting for her to complete tasks. I was assessing whether her heart had genuinely changed. The document included specific criteria for measuring authentic transformation: consistent kindness to people who could not benefit her, voluntary service beyond minimum requirements, financial decisions that considered impact on others, and the ability to accept criticism without defensive reactions. The power shift became evident during our first monthly review meeting. Instead of negotiating or complaining, Rebecca arrived with a detailed report of her activities and a request for feedback on areas where she needed improvement. She had found work at a clothing boutique where she earned $12 per hour and was learning to interact respectfully with customers from all economic backgrounds. She'd completed her first month of volunteer work at the Children's Hospital and had written thoughtful reflections on what the experience was teaching her about privilege and responsibility. Most significantly, Rebecca had begun the process of making face-to-face apologies, starting with Maria. The meeting had lasted 4 hours, with Rebecca listening carefully as Maria described the financial and emotional impact of her sudden termination. Rather than offering excuses or explanations, Rebecca had simply acknowledged the wrongness of her actions and asked how she could begin to make amends. Maria's response had been gracious but firm. Rebecca would need to demonstrate sustained change over time before trust could be rebuilt. The documentation process revealed patterns that surprised even me. Rebecca's initial work performance had been poor, with complaints from customers about her impatience and sense of superiority. But within 3 weeks, her supervisors noticed genuine improvement in her attitude and customer service skills. At the hospital, she had initially struggled with the emotional demands of seeing sick children, but she had persisted through the discomfort and was beginning to form meaningful connections with families facing medical crises. Perhaps most importantly, Rebecca was starting to understand the connection between character and happiness. In her written reflections, she described feeling more fulfilled during her $12 per hour work shifts than she had ever felt while spending money freely. "When I help a customer find something that makes them happy, I feel useful in a way I never experienced before," she wrote. "And when I see parents at the hospital staying strong for their sick children, I realize how shallow my previous problems were." The counterattack phase gradually gave way to genuine cooperation as Rebecca began to experience the benefits of living according to different values. The work at the boutique introduced her to women who managed households, raised children, and pursued education on limited budgets. These colleagues taught her practical skills she had never needed to learn: comparison shopping, meal planning, budgeting for necessities, and finding satisfaction in small accomplishments. At the hospital, she witnessed daily examples of courage and selflessness that put her previous concerns into perspective. Parents who slept in uncomfortable chairs for weeks while caring for sick children, families who shared resources with other families in crisis, children who faced medical procedures with bravery that humbled the adults around them. These experiences were changing her understanding of what constituted real problems and what represented genuine strength. The accountability group meetings proved to be the most transformative element of the process. The other members had overcome addictions, abusive behaviors, criminal histories, and various forms of selfishness that had damaged their relationships and communities. They shared their stories without self-pity and held each other to high standards without judgment. For the first time in her life, Rebecca was part of a group where status and wealth were irrelevant, where respect had to be earned through consistent character, and where honesty about personal failures was valued more than public success. 6 months into the process, Dr. Ricardo scheduled a comprehensive review meeting to assess Rebecca's progress and determine her readiness for increased responsibility. The meeting included documentation from her employer, her volunteer supervisor, her accountability group facilitator, and the people to whom she had made apologies. The consensus was remarkable. Rebecca was not simply complying with requirements, but was genuinely becoming a different person. The evidence was both quantitative and qualitative. She had not missed a single day of work or volunteer service, had received positive evaluations from supervisors, and had completed all required apologies with sincerity that impressed even those who had been most hurt by her previous behavior. But more importantly, she was beginning to initiate acts of kindness and service that went beyond the minimum requirements. She had used her limited earnings to help a coworker whose child needed medical treatment, had organized fundraising activities at the boutique for local charities, and had developed mentoring relationships with other young people in her accountability group. The transformation was evident in her language and priorities as well. Instead of complaining about the limitations of her budget, she talked about the creativity required to live well within her means. Instead of resenting her work schedule, she expressed gratitude for the opportunity to contribute value to others. Instead of viewing the volunteer work as an obligation, she had begun to see it as a privilege that connected her to a community of people facing real challenges with remarkable grace. But the ultimate test came when Dr. Ricardo presented Rebecca with an unexpected opportunity that would reveal whether her changes were superficial or genuine. An elderly relative, her father's brother, Tobias, had died and left her $75 million in a separate inheritance that was not subject to the restrictions of Vitorino's will. This money could be accessed immediately without any conditions or oversight. The question was whether Rebecca would use this windfall to abandon her current path, or whether she would apply the values she was learning to this new opportunity. Rebecca's response to this news provided the clearest evidence that her transformation was real. Instead of celebrating or immediately accessing the funds, she asked for time to consider how this inheritance could be used responsibly. She spent 2 weeks researching the social problems she had witnessed during her volunteer work and her new job, identifying specific needs where significant funding could make lasting impacts. When she presented her conclusions, even Dr. Ricardo was impressed by the thoughtfulness of her analysis. The plan she proposed would have made her father proud. She wanted to establish scholarship programs for the children of single mothers, create microloans for women starting small businesses, fund expanded facilities at the Children's Hospital, and support the accountability group program that had been so instrumental in her own growth. Rather than using the money to restore her previous lifestyle, she saw it as an opportunity to address the suffering and inequality she had witnessed during her months of required service. More significantly, she requested that I be given formal oversight of how these funds were used, acknowledging that she was still learning to make decisions based on impact rather than personal preference. "I don't trust myself yet to handle this much money without guidance," she admitted during our discussion of her proposal. "I've learned enough to know how much I still need to learn." This level of humility and self-awareness represented a complete reversal from the arrogance that had characterized her behavior after her father's death. The reconciliation between us happened gradually rather than through a single dramatic moment. As Rebecca demonstrated sustained change over many months, I began to see glimpses of the daughter I remembered from her childhood, but enhanced by hard-won wisdom and genuine empathy. Our weekly conversations shifted from progress reports to genuine exchanges of ideas and feelings. She began asking for my advice, not because it was required, but because she valued my perspective and wanted to continue learning from my experience. The formal restoration of our relationship was marked by a ceremony Dr. Ricardo organized in his office, where the inheritance restrictions were officially modified to reflect Rebecca's demonstrated character growth. Instead of simply returning her previous access to funds, we established a partnership structure where major financial decisions would be made jointly. This arrangement protected against any future reversion to selfish behavior, while acknowledging her genuine transformation and preparing her for eventual full independence. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came when Rebecca surprised me with a request that demonstrated how completely her priorities had shifted. She wanted to use a portion of her inheritance to purchase the small hotel where I had been staying during the months of her testing. Her plan was to convert it into transitional housing for families dealing with medical crises at the nearby children's hospital, providing them with affordable accommodation during their most difficult times. I want to turn the place where I forced you to live in hardship into a place where other families can find hope during their hardships, she explained. And I want you to help me run it, because you understand better than anyone how to maintain dignity and strength when everything seems lost. The proposal was both a practical use of resources and a symbolic acknowledgement of how her cruelty had been transformed into compassion. The establishment of the Vitorino Azevedo Foundation became the concrete expression of both Rebecca's transformation and our renewed partnership. Rather than simply writing checks to existing charities, we committed to hands-on involvement in addressing the specific problems we had witnessed during her period of service and learning. The foundation would be large enough to make significant impacts, but structured to ensure that every dollar was used efficiently and effectively. Our first major project was the creation of a comprehensive support system for families dealing with childhood cancer, inspired by Rebecca's volunteer work at the hospital. The program included financial assistance, temporary housing, emotional counseling, and educational support for siblings affected by their brother or sister's illness. Rebecca took personal responsibility for visiting families and understanding their specific needs, ensuring that our assistance was tailored to individual circumstances rather than based on administrative convenience. The scholarship program for single mothers became our second major initiative, addressing the economic inequality Rebecca had witnessed while working at the boutique. Many of her former colleagues were brilliant women whose educational and career opportunities had been limited by lack of childcare, transportation, or financial resources. The scholarships included not just tuition assistance, but comprehensive support systems that addressed the practical barriers preventing these women from achieving their potential. The microloan program was designed based on Rebecca's growing understanding of how small amounts of capital could create significant opportunities for economic independence. Through her work and volunteer activities, she'd met numerous women with viable business ideas who lacked the initial funding or credit history to secure traditional bank loans. Our program provided not just money, but mentorship and business development support to maximize the likelihood of success. The expansion of the Accountability Group program reflected our recognition that character development required ongoing community support. Many people struggling with selfishness, addiction, or destructive behaviors lacked access to the kind of structured peer support that had been so crucial to Rebecca's transformation. We funded the training of additional group facilitators and the establishment of programs in underserved communities where such resources were most needed. Each of these initiatives required us to work closely together, combining my life experience with Rebecca's growing understanding of social problems and her enthusiasm for hands-on problem solving. The partnership forced us to communicate regularly, make decisions collaboratively, and hold each other accountable for the impact of our choices. This ongoing cooperation completed the healing of our relationship while ensuring that our charitable work remained focused and effective. But the most profound revelation came when we discovered additional documents Vitorino had left in a safety deposit box that Dr. Ricardo revealed only after Rebecca had successfully completed 2 full years of demonstrated character change. The box contained letters Vitorino had written to both of us, explaining the full scope of his plan and his hopes for its outcome. But it also contained evidence of secret philanthropic work he had been conducting for decades without our knowledge. The documentation revealed that Vitorino had quietly donated over $100 million to various causes throughout his lifetime, funding scholarships, medical research, community centers, and disaster relief efforts. He had deliberately kept this work secret from us, not out of modesty, but because he wanted his charitable giving to be motivated by genuine concern for others rather than social recognition or family expectations. The letters explained that he hoped his hidden example would inspire us to find our own authentic reasons for service, rather than simply copying his approach. More importantly, the letters revealed that Vitorino's elaborate plan for Rebecca's testing and potential transformation had been motivated by love rather than disappointment. He had seen the warning signs of selfishness and entitlement in her behavior, but he had also seen glimpses of the empathy and kindness that had characterized her childhood. His complex scheme with the inheritance clause, the required service, and the delayed revelations was designed to create circumstances that would reawaken her capacity for compassion while ensuring she developed the practical skills and emotional resilience necessary to use wealth responsibly. "I could have simply given both of you the money and hoped for the best," Vitorino had written in his letter to me. "But I loved you both too much to leave your character development to chance. Rebecca needed to experience genuine hardship and learn the value of work and service before she could appreciate the responsibility that comes with wealth. You needed to see that your years of parenting had planted seeds of goodness that could still grow if given the right conditions." The letter to Rebecca was even more moving, acknowledging his recognition of his own failures as a parent while expressing his confidence in her fundamental capacity for goodness. "I gave you wealth without wisdom, comfort without character, and opportunities without obligations," he had written. "These were my mistakes, not yours. But I also saw the little girl who gave her stuffed elephant to a sick child, and I believed that person was still inside you, waiting for the right circumstances to emerge. This plan is my attempt to create those circumstances and to give you the chance to become the person I always knew you could be." The final revelation from Vitorino's letters was his instruction that, if Rebecca successfully completed her character development journey, we should be told about a final resource he had established, an additional trust fund of $50 million specifically designated for our joint charitable work. This money was to be used for whatever causes we identified together as most important, with the understanding that our partnership in giving would continue to strengthen our relationship while maximizing our positive impact on the world. This final gift from Vitorino allowed us to expand the Foundation's work significantly while cementing our commitment to working together rather than independently. We established college programs, expanded the hospital support services, created job training initiatives, and funded research into the social problems we had witnessed during Rebecca's transformation journey. Each project was designed and implemented through our collaboration, ensuring that both of our perspectives and areas of expertise contributed to the solution. The boundary I established through this entire process was clear and non-negotiable. Love and support would be available whenever Rebecca demonstrated genuine character, but enabling or excusing selfishness would never happen again. This boundary was not meant as punishment, but as protection, both for her and for the people whose lives would be affected by her choices. The consequence for crossing this boundary was not rejection, but rather the loss of access to resources that could be used to harm others through thoughtless or cruel decisions. The educational aspect of this consequence was crucial to its effectiveness. Rather than simply removing privileges, the loss of inheritance access was tied to opportunities for growth and redemption. Rebecca learned that character failures had practical consequences that affected not just her own comfort, but her ability to contribute positively to the world. This connection between personal development and social responsibility became the foundation for her new understanding of what wealth could and should accomplish. The concrete micro-purpose that emerged from our experience was the creation of a replicable model for character-based inheritance and philanthropy. Through the foundation, we began working with other wealthy families who were concerned about the impact of unearned wealth on their children's character development. We developed structured programs that combined service requirements, financial education, and mentorship opportunities to help young people from privileged backgrounds develop the skills and values necessary to use their advantages responsibly. This work gave both of us a sense of mission that extended beyond our own family healing. We were helping to address one of the most significant problems facing our society: the tendency for wealth concentration to create entitled individuals who use their advantages to exploit rather than serve others. By sharing the lessons we had learned through our painful but ultimately redemptive journey, we could help other families avoid similar crises while contributing to a more just and compassionate society. The final reflection on our experience was that Vitorino's true legacy was not the money he had accumulated, but the wisdom he had gained about the relationship between character and happiness. His elaborate plan for testing and transforming Rebecca's values was based on his understanding that wealth without virtue creates misery for both the wealthy person and everyone affected by their choices. By forcing our daughter to earn wisdom through hardship and service, he had given her the tools necessary to find genuine fulfillment rather than empty pleasure. Today, as I watch Rebecca work alongside hospital families, mentor young women starting their careers, and carefully evaluate every foundation decision based on its potential impact on others, I see the daughter I always hoped she would become. But more importantly, I see a woman who has earned her values through struggle and sacrifice, rather than inheriting them through expectation. The boundary I maintain is no longer about protecting myself from her cruelty, but about supporting her continued growth, while ensuring that the resources at our disposal continue to serve purposes larger than our own comfort and convenience. Sometimes the greatest gift a parent can give is the chance to learn from our mistakes and become who we're truly meant to be. And that was today's story of love, redemption, and finding our way back to each other. If you enjoyed it, subscribe here. There are many more stories to come.